Welcome to Advocacy Politics Unplugged, the show that will dissect critical policy issues, explore the art of advocacy in politics, and share insights on how to make your voice heard in today's ever-changing political landscape. I'm your host, John Ravitz, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Business Council of Westchester. We're very excited to announce this month that we have a new sponsor for this podcast, and that's Verizon. Verizon is a member of the BCW and plays such an important role in the business community, not just in Westchester County, but for the entire state. So we're very glad that Verizon is now the sponsor of Advocacy and Politics Unplugged. Our guest today for this episode is Cathy Rinaldi, who is the president of MTA and Metro North Railroad. Let me tell you a little bit about Cathy's incredible career. She has been the president of the MTA Metro North Railroad since February of 2018. She's the sixth president of Metro North and the first woman to hold this position. As Metro North president, Ms. Rinaldi led the agency through the COVID-19 pandemic, including the development of health and safety protocols during the pandemic and the implementation of strategies to increase post-COVID ridership. Under her leadership, Metro North met the federal deadline for implementation of positive train control across Metro North's territory. And in addition, she served as the interim president of the Long Island Railroad from February of 2022 through October of 2023. The combined role allowed Ms. Rinaldi to promote greater collaboration between the two railroads, allowing the railroad's operating departments to learn from each other and identify best practices to solve common problems. In her role as the interim president of the Long Island Railroad, Ms. Rinaldi was involved in readiness activities associated with the commencement of the Long Island Railroad service into Grand Central Station. Ms. Rinaldi has worked to improve employee engagement at both railroads, and these efforts have included panel discussions, recognition events, and the launch of a podcast and a blog post. She's joined the MTA as general counsel in 2003, and before assuming her current role, she also served as the Long Island Railroad general counsel and the MTA chief of staff and Metro North executive vice president. Mm-hmm. To say you know this agency from top to bottom would be an understatement. So, Cathy, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us today.
No, thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here today.
One of the things that we have always stated at the Business Council of Westchester in our legislative agenda is the important role that transit plays for the business community in Westchester County, the region, and the entire state, especially when we're talking about the fact that you're responsible for bringing riders to New York City on a daily basis and the challenges that you have. We want to spend today's show really talking about and hearing about your priorities going into 2025, some of the initiatives that you have created, and also talk about some of the things that the riders are going to be able to see themselves in terms of some of those improvements. So can you talk to us a little bit about the Future Rides With Us, which is your 2025-2029 capital plan?
Sure, absolutely. So thanks again for having me here today. It's obviously a really important topic for the county and for the business community, so I'm really happy to be able to explain the kind of investments that we want to make in this capital program. So just to back up a little bit, this is a statutory process. Every 5 years, the MTA goes through this exercise of assessing their assets and identifying investment priorities for all the different MTA agencies. So we went through that process, and we're now at the point where we're looking forward to the 2025 to 2029 capital program and the investments for Metro North specifically. So really excited to see an unprecedented level of investment in Metro North's infrastructure. We're really proud of the service that we provide. As you said, the business community, really all of Westchester relies upon the reliability of our service. And I think the investments that are contained in this capital program submission really focus on the important things that are going to be necessary to keep our service safe and reliable. So, like, what are those things? Rolling stock. Right? I mean, I think that, over the years we have invested in our trains, but there are some trains that are still out there that are old and have seen better days. Our oldest electric cars, the M3 cars, date back to the mid-1980s. They're still running around out there. I take one every morning, but they don't have ADA-compliant bathrooms because the ADA wasn't in existence when those cars arrived on the property. They're harder to maintain because they're older, harder to find parts. So we're going to be replacing those cars with new electric cars. They have a lot more bells and whistles, much more comfortable for our customers. ADA-compliant bathrooms, so that's an important investment. Our stations, that's going to be a huge area of focus in this capital program. especially the stations on the lower Harlem line. So if you go to Crestwood or Fleetwood or Mount Vernon West or Scarsdale, Hartsdale, a lot of those stations have an older technology with respect to the construction of the platforms, and they're really deteriorating in a rapid way. And we're shoring them up, actually. If you go to those stations and you pay close attention, they're actually being held up by wooden, wooden, I think they're 2x2s or 2x4s, right? So it's not sustainable. If you go to Crestwood in particular, and I was there with the Senate Majority Leader about a month ago, we actually have a portion of the southbound platform that's closed to customers because it's structurally impaired and not safe for them to walk on that section of the platform, right? We can't have that. We need to have platforms that are new and safe, and there's going to be a tremendous level of investment in those stations, especially on the lower Harlem line. And sort of associated with that, accessibility, right? Making more of our stations accessible to our customers who have mobility challenges. So we're going to be making Ludlow Station, which is on the Hudson Line, accessible, as well as Wakefield Station in the Bronx. And this is another way of being able to attract more people to the system. The other thing I just wanted to sort of call out, sort of two other categories of investment, are really important investments with respect to the resiliency of our infrastructure, to address the issues of climate change, especially on the Hudson Line. So I think some of your listeners may remember the really crazy heavy rains we got with Hurricane Ida a few years back, resulted in a pretty significant mudslide on some tracks near Yonkers along Warburton Avenue, and then we had some other issues further up the Hudson Line. It's sort of a unique environment, right? I mean, you've got the river on one side, and some of the track are located in certain locations, like literally right on the river. But then you have a pretty steep gradient on the other side, which you have mud and rock, and some heavy rain events just wash down on the tracks. So we have a resiliency strategy as part of this capital program to be able to address some of these geographical and climate change challenges along the Hudson Line, focusing largely south of Croton-Harmon, and that's drainage work, repairing culverts, trying to shore up some of the infrastructure so it's not as vulnerable to not only heavy rain events, but just it's a tidal estuary, right, the Hudson, so it's you have some tidal flooding as well. So really a concerted, coordinated strategy for resiliency along the Hudson Line and then some other areas on the Harlem Line. And then a major category of investments within Grand Central, which I can talk to in a little bit.
You're listening to Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, part of the BCW Podcast Network. Our guest for today's episode is Cathy Rinaldi, who's the president of the MTA Metro-North Railroad. That's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
And it obviously has to now go through a process.
It does.
With the legislature. And a budget has to be created to
Yes.
present to the legislature. When you and your team sit down and say, okay, here are our priorities, now we got to put numbers to those
Right.
priorities.
Right.
What does that look like?
Yeah, so the process is kind of getting to the point that we're at now is kind of a multi-year process. So there's this, a year ago, MTA finalized a document that we call the 20-year needs. And that's sort of the planning exercise that goes into the development of the actual capital program that's submitted to Albany. And that's where you look at all the assets, top to bottom, soup to nuts, to see where the needs are and what the level of investment should be to be able to get those assets to where they need to be. So that happened last year, and that kind of informed this capital program document that we're talking about today. It was approved by the MTA board in September and was sent up pursuant to statute to what they call the Capital Program Review Board, which consists of members of the executive and the legislature, and they actually have to decide, thumbs up or thumbs down on the capital program. And that document was sent up in October, and it's now pending before the Capital Program Review Board.
And we all hope it's a thumbs up, but if that board gives it a thumbs up, then what's the next step?
We got to pay for it. I mean, and that's the strategy, right? That's going to be the issue. We need to identify revenue sources, and that's usually a mix of state, federal, local, to be able to pay for the investments that are contained in the capital program. And obviously not just Metro-North investments, Long Island Railroad, New York City Transit. So there's a whole series of investments in this capital program, and we're going to be working once the legislature is back in session in January to identify a mix of options to be able to fill in the gaps with respect to the funding of the capital program.
when you look at the plan, and we appreciate the fact that you and your team gave Marcia Gordon, the president and CEO of the Business Council, and myself an overview of the plan. Obviously, and you touched on this, the state of good repairs.
Yes.
And again, as your riders who are using your system on a daily basis, that is important.
Absolutely.
For comfort, but most importantly for safety.
Sure.
So as you were putting that section of the plan together, what were the things that you really wanted to be laser focused on?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I want to step back and talk a little bit about the service because, we have consistently high customer satisfaction rankings, the highest of all the MTA agencies, and we're really proud of that. We provide a safe, comfortable ride. Our on-time performance is well above goal, so we're really happy with the service that we provide. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that it's not just the service into Grand Central that's important to the business community. For a lot of employers in Westchester, the reverse commute is also super important. So a lot of people have final destinations. They get on in Fordham, they get on other stations in the Bronx, and they get off in places like White Plains or New Rochelle, go over into Connecticut to Greenwich and Stamford. So it's really, that reverse commute is also one of the things that distinguishes Metro North, and it really helped us post-COVID to get ridership back because people are traveling in both directions, which is great. So we really focused on those investments that were important to the safety of the service, but also to the overall customer, the comfort and the overall customer experience, to keep people coming back and wanting to stay. With respect to the safety of the system, we're really trying to accelerate investments in our track infrastructure because some of that stuff hasn't been touched for years, and we have a regular track program, but we want to accelerate that. Another series of investments is in power. Again, not something that people think about, but investments in our substations, our third rail, our catenary and catenary territory. Those are the things that really, really affect the reliability of the service. I say sometimes that when I get a call in the middle of the night, a lot of the times it's power, which is not something that people think about. But if you don't have power, you're not running trains. So we really need to make investments in those power assets. And then our signal infrastructure. Right, some of those cables were laid years and years and years ago. These things are all, that sort of quintessential invisible infrastructure, but things that really, really affect the reliability of the service. So you need to, even though there's not going to be a fancy ribbon cutting when I put in a new substation, it's going to be one of those things that's going to make the service so much more reliable.
Well, again, and that it goes to another point that we at the Business Council of Westchester have been, again, laser focused on, which is the changing energy landscape that we have here in Westchester, but throughout the state. And obviously, we need to have a grid that's reliable and sustainable. And you just raised a point that probably 99.9% of your ridership really don't understand is that you have to be aware of that and you have to be monitoring that as well. So as the state does continue to move forward with renewable energy and other sources of clean energy, how is that going to affect you on a daily basis and your people?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we obviously partner with the local utilities, and but that strong partnership and having assets that are in a state of good repair on the power side, I really can't stress enough how important that is to the reliability of service.
Let's. We touched on it in your bio, but I think it is important for our listeners to really understand the really Herculean work that you and your team did to bring ridership back and confidence back post-COVID.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that transition from what you found yourself in when we were smack dab in the middle of COVID to where we are now in the end of 2024.
Well, sure. I mean, if you go back to March of 2020, I mean, ridership dropped like a rock. I mean, the first couple months of 2020, we were on target to have, best ridership ever. And then by the end of March, we were carrying roughly 5%. Of our ridership from a couple months before. So, the drop was really precipitous. And really the people that we were carrying at that point in time were essential workers, healthcare workers and police officers, firefighters, that sort of thing. So they were really the core of our ridership during those early days of the pandemic. And since that time, I mean, we obviously ran a reduced schedule at that point in time, but what we've tried to do since then and what we are doing now is, putting the service out there that people need to try to attract people back. The one bright spot really throughout the pandemic, and which continues to this day, is the extent to which people have relied upon really the entire MTA system, but Metro North in particular, for discretionary travel. So back in April, May, whatever of 2020, I'm on all these panels about ridership. When is ridership going to come back? And we thought that ridership, that kind of discretionary ridership, was going to be the last to come back because why would people get on a train if they didn't have to? That was never the case. Weekend ridership was always strong. The discretionary ridership was always strong, and that is the case today. We're seeing weekends. I mean, this time of year, it's the fall. It's sort of our kind of our signature season in the Hudson Valley.
Sure.
I mean, we're carrying more than 100% of what we were carrying pre-COVID on the weekends. We're adding trains, and we were adding trains, and they're still standing room only. So people want to ride on the weekends. With respect to during the week, I mean, I think it's been, I think a couple of strategies, right? Hybrid work has affected how often people travel to the city. There's just no two ways about that. So Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays tend to be our busiest days by far. We've set some records over the course of the last month or two on Tuesdays and Wednesdays in particulars. Monday's coming back. I think more and more employers in the city are calling people back to work, 4 or 5 days a week. So Mondays are definitely coming back. But Fridays are quiet. So, we've adjusted some of the frequency of our service to adapt to the fact that Thursday's more of a getaway day, Friday's more of a getaway day, not necessarily a day where people are going into the office. The MTA created what we call a city ticket program to encourage more ridership in the Bronx. For some of those people, they don't really think of commuter rail as being kind of a mode of choice for them. But some of those stations are not really close to the subway. So people who might otherwise have relied upon a bus or not have traveled at all, we've created a discounted fare product both in the peak and off-peak to be able to encourage more people in the Bronx to take the trains as a way of bringing back that ridership and encouraging a new base. And then the last thing that I would point to, and it goes back to what you were saying on my bio with respect to my gig at the Long Island Railroad for a while. When Grand Central Madison opened, it created really new connectivity between the two railroads that never existed before, and that I think is super advantageous for the entire region. So, for example, I live on the Hudson Line, and the only way for me to get to JFK now is to take the train. I would never drive to JFK. So I get on the Hudson Line, I go to Grand Central, I go downstairs to Grand Central Madison, and I get the first train out to Jamaica. So it's just an incredibly easy way for folks in Metro North Territory to get to JFK and other destinations on Long Island. I regularly see Yankees fans coming up from the Long Island Railroad to get on my trains to go up to Yankee Stadium, vice versa for Mets fans going out to Citi Field. There's tremendous connectivity between the two railroads, and we've created actually a discounted ticket to be able to, we call it a combo ticket, to be able to encourage more of that ridership. So I think we just need to be opportunistic in terms of identifying people that we hadn't really served before or focused on before, and make the case for why commuter rail is really an option for them in terms of how they get around the region, not just to go to work, but to go to the doctor or see their mother or whatever, right? It's go see the Yankees. It's a great way to get around, and I think that's why these investments are so important.
Well, and again, one of the things that we appreciated in Westchester County was that you really looked at that parity. I mean, obviously, you knew the Long Island Railroad system, but you now living in Westchester in this area, you've seen, again, some of the stations and some of the work.
Yes.
So there is going to be a level playing field, which I think is important. As we look to recruit and retain businesses in Westchester County and the region, we now can say there is a plan in place to make sure that your employees, as well as your customers who might be traveling to come and see you, are going to be having that and see those improvements.
Yeah, I mean, I think the parity point is really important, right? I mean, Long Island, they recently opened the third track project, which gave them additional capacity to be able to build up their reverse commute. We have one because we already have our reverse commute. Which is great for us. But the parity is important because we have not only our core program is the same as Long Island's, we have these kind of extra investments in this current capital program beyond our core program. So we have $800 million for the Hudson Line resiliency investments that I described a little while ago, plus some additional resiliency efforts in the Bronx and on the Harlem Line to be able to make the service more robust. And then the Grand Central investments, which I just want to touch upon because that's super important. Grand Central opened, it was renovated, as people remember, in the 90s, but most of that stuff was the customer-facing stuff. So the ceiling looks beautiful and the clock looks beautiful, and if you kind of scratch the surface with the systems underneath, not so beautiful. So we need to make investments in, sort of the back-of-house systems in the terminal, but also what we call the Grand Central train shed, which is the it's the structure that essentially covers Grand Central's train yards, and the big buildings on Park Avenue above rest upon that structure. And for years, water and salt has been leaking in, deteriorating this steel structure at an alarming rate. So we need to replace that structure to be able to, to preserve the integrity of the system and the safety of the people who ride through it. Then after that, if you kind of go north, if you're on your train north to Westchester, you pass through the train shed, and then you go through the Park Avenue tunnel. In that tunnel, we need to make ventilation and other fire life safety investments, so that's included in this capital program. And then you pop out into the sunlight, and you're going to be traveling over the Park Avenue viaduct. And that viaduct is more than 100 years old, well past its useful life. It sustained a significant fire, I think it was in 2017, that closed us down, and it's a single point of failure for the entire system. All of our trains that go into Grand Central pass over that viaduct. So we're making significant investments to replace, not even just repair. We've been preparing for 100 years. Replace it. And we did a lot of work over the summer, and that work is going to continue beginning in the spring. So those investments in what we call the Grand Central artery I can't stress again here how super important they are to the integrity of the entire system, because it is a single port of failure for a Metro North system.
In this short amount of time, I hope our listeners really have gotten a good understanding of the scope of work that your organization has to do on a daily basis for the ridership in the region and throughout the state, but also the importance of these funding projects that you are looking to do. And again, to build that reliability and and the safety issues and the comfort issues as well. And it all comes down to, again, making sure that the dollars are in place. And I know that's a challenge. We at the Business Council of Westchester, as we're putting together our 2025 legislative agenda, will include our support for this plan.
Fantastic.
Because we understand, again, that if we are going to recruit and retain businesses, we need to give you and your colleagues at Metro North all the support you can get.
Thank you. We appreciate
under
that.
your leadership, it's been terrific. Our guest this afternoon has been Cathy Rinaldi, who is the president of the MTA Metro North Railroad. Again, please call on the Business Council of Westchester when we can be of assistance, but also the business community. I think the one thing that these podcasts do is they go out to the world, right? And I think businesses nationally, internationally, all are going to use your system, and they need to know how important it is that you have the support to be able to give that type of service that you want to deliver. So thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
This is John Ravitz, the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for the Business Council of Westchester. You've been listening to Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, sponsored by Verizon. We look forward to having you all listen to our next episode next month. Thank you. Be sure to check out the BCW Podcast Network's expansive lineup of shows: Leadership Unleashed, What's Trending, the Member Spotlight, WIN, the Innovation Roundtable, and Advocacy and Politics Unplugged. Stay tuned to our next episode of Advocacy and Politics Unplugged, premiering next month. The Business Council of Westchester is the county's largest business membership organization focusing on economic development and advocacy. With over 1,100 members, it is our mission to work for the profitability of our members and prosperity for the Westchester community. To learn more about the Business Council of Westchester, please go to www.thebcw.org.